From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to our Books and Beyond program today, which is co-sponsored by the Center for the Book and the Publishing Office. The Center for the Book, for those of you who don't know about us, is this part of the library that promotes books, reading, libraries, and literacy, and we do that on a nationwide basis through our affiliated state centers for the book, and we even have one in the Virgin Islands. Another thing that we do is we play an important role in the National Book Festival by inviting all the authors and organizing the program. And for those of you who don't know about it, it's this year, it's September 22nd and 23rd. I'd also like to ask you all to turn off all your electronic devices and to let you know that we're recording this for later webcasting. So if you ask a question at the end of the program, you'll be a part of that webcast. And if you're interested in our webcasts, they're all available. More than 200 of them are available on our website at read.gov. Also want to let you know that this book today will be for sale at the 20% discount outside the room here following the program if you'd like to purchase it. Sometimes people ask us how we determine how we do these Books and Beyond programs from among the thousands of books that are published every single year, and a lot of the reason we do them is we do Books and Beyond programs that are based on the Library of Congress collections, and this book was heavily researched here at the Library of Congress, and we want to thank the publishing office for producing the book and for bringing it to us today. And it's my pleasure to introduce the director of our publishing office, Ralph Eubanks, who will introduce our speakers. Please welcome Ralph.
Good afternoon, and thanks for coming out today. Excuse me. For those of you who don't know about us, the Publishing Office of the Library of Congress, which you can find information about at loc.gov/publish/general, is to make the collections of the library accessible through what we publish. And to that end, we publish about 30 titles a year. We have about 150 titles currently in print, books, knowledge cards, postcard books, calendars, and all of these books and other products are taken from the collections of the library, trying to get the collections of the library into the hands of average Americans. We largely produce our products in association with trade publishers such as Quirk Books, who's our partner on this project. We often develop projects ourselves. Sometimes publishers come to us with ideas, and this is a case where a publisher came to the publishing office with an idea. When the publisher at Quirk Books, Steven Seagal, called me and asked me if we would do a book on presidential campaign posters. He said it would be modeled on a book they did called Gig Posters, which fortunately I knew something about because my kids had decorated 2 dormitory rooms with the posters from that book. So I got a sense from that call that this was a book that was going to get our material from our archive into a very different demographic, a very new demographic. And I was very excited about that. So that meant in developing this book, we had to think very carefully about what we used visually, as well as the text that accompanied those, and just a slightly different tone because we were going for a demographic that was largely under the age of 40. As I said, most of our book projects are produced in collaboration with trade publishers, and we're always trying through what we publish to provide as broad an introduction to our collections as we possibly can. And we also want to give the reader a sense of what it's like to do research in the collections of the Library of Congress. And to that end, we use our general collections, which is housed on 838 miles of bookshelves, to research and check facts, which is what we did with this book. Every election was researched using our general collections, as well as materials housed in the manuscript division, our newspaper collections, and even our rare book collection. All of those collections had material that helped us find facts, as well as visual material that you see in the pages of presidential campaign posters. Now, the original idea was to have a poster and the story of the election on the other side of the poster, because these are all ready-to-frame posters that are in presidential campaign posters. But with our collection, the Library of Congress has over 100,000 posters addressing a vast range of subjects, including an extensive collection related to American political campaigns. We had an embarrassment of riches. So that meant that we had to make some tough choices about what to include, which posters to include, and which posters to leave out. And what you're seeing here is the original idea for the cover of the book, which has changed slightly since since the book is published. One of the reasons we did have to change is we had a few images there. You see there's an image of Truman there with Dewey on the piano, Tom Dewey on the piano, and that's an image that was done by Ben Shahn, so it's under copyright, and we couldn't use that on the cover of the book. So, but the other thing that we had to do is we had to think about creating some visual tension in this book. So, you go back here. Well, that's one of the things that created some visual tension in the book, because that's one of the things we had to think about is whether to include the actual poster itself or a parody of that poster, which is what we ended up doing in this case, is using the actual poster, because the actual poster with this psychedelic image of Richard Nixon surrounded by Republican luminaries and Wilt Chamberlain looming in the background, it was a little bit just as odd, I think, as the Nixon's the One poster. So we did do that. So as I mentioned, we did use a lot of things for visual tension. So what we have on the back of the poster is usually something maybe from our sheet music collection, the manuscript division, prints and photographs, a photograph of a campaign stop. All of those things were included in the book. And we used a lot of those for supplemental images. So fortunately, we had, as I said, we had a lot of interesting posters for some years, 1968 in particular, which is the year that this is taken from. So we used a lot of material from 1968. But what I think is most striking about this collection of posters is what it reveals about the unchanging nature of American politics. The Library of Congress houses in the Prints and Photographs Division one of the most comprehensive poster collections in the world. And in these posters, you see the same posturing, the same accusations of corruption, of moral turpitude, and insinuations of suspicious religious beliefs or hidden religious affiliations hurled across party lines through the centuries. And a project such as presidential campaign posters, like all of our projects in the publishing office, was a group effort. Not only did we work with the editorial staff at Quirk Books, but we also worked with our entire 6-person editorial staff, along with our project manager, Amy Paston. 2 members of my staff are here today to talk about the material we used for presidential campaign posters, and they'll give you some background on the research that was done, both with respect to the images that appear in the book, as well as the accompanying text. The first person who's going to come on is Amy Hess, who's a writer-editor in the publishing office, and she will be followed by Tom Weiner, who is also a writer-editor in the publishing office. So I'm going to now turn it over to Amy Hess.
Okay, hello. Well, Ralph mentioned all the different divisions we used when we were researching this book, and I wanted to start out by taking a closer look at some of the material we found during our research. Oop. Oop.
Did I get the right ones?
Yeah. Okay, so he mentioned the general collections. There were a ton of sources in the general collections, and we kind of picked the ones that we found most reliable and created our own library within the publishing office that we all used when researching the campaigns. So this is just a picture to give you an idea of the textual materials we found. These are a couple of items from our rare book division. On the left is from the Printed Ephemera collection, which is a collection of Americana that numbers over 28,000 items and includes everything from broadsides like this one from the 1856 election to menus, invitations, petitions, propaganda, business cards, you name it. On the right is a lithograph from the Alfred Whitall Stern collection of Lincolnia, which is a private collection that was given to the library in 1953. This poster is from our Geography and Map division. It was made for the 1864 election during the Civil War, and the map on the poster shows loyal states in green, rebel holdings in red, and land taken from the rebels in yellow. These items are from our manuscript division. On the left is an 1860 wood engraving that is advertising cigars. This is from the Lincoln Papers. The library holds the papers of every president from Washington to Coolidge, as a side note. And the two on the right are interesting because I think when you think of a manuscript division, a lot of people picture papers and letters and things, but the manuscript division here also has a lot of unexpected items like this campaign button and a license plate from the Kemp campaign. Ralph mentioned the sheet music here at the library. The Library of Congress, the music division here, has the largest sheet music collection in the world, and we found a lot of wonderful sheet music. You can see some examples here. There's plenty more in the book. I especially love Hoover. And another favorite we found that you can see in the book that we all liked was Get on the Raft with Taft. Moving on to the Prints and Photographs division, which is where the majority of the artwork in this book came from. I just wanted to show you that even within that division, we found a lot of material that wasn't necessarily posters. Here we have an advertisement from 1848, which is the tobacco ad there. We have a woodcut from 1840 on the bottom left. We have a 1900 magazine cover of Puck magazine, a lithograph from 1848, which is the Taylor, and a postcard from 1908. So that's just an example of the variety of materials we found. We also found plenty of campaign buttons in the Prints and Photographs division. Plenty of political cartoons. The Doonesbury one is especially good. And then, of course, photographs, which is in the title of the Prints and Photographs division. Of course, we found a lot there. That one on the top left is a photograph of Hughes supporters from 1916. It's from the Bain collection of news photographs. There's also a photograph of Hoover campaigning in the 1928 election, which is in our National Photo Company collection. There's Kids for Bobby Kennedy. That's from our Look magazine collection. And this photo of the 2008 Republican National Convention, which is a Carol Highsmith photo. Carol Highsmith is a living photographer who has donated all of her photographs to the Library of Congress and to the public domain. So that's a plethora of material, which there's all of that and more in the book. And I'm going to turn things over to Tom now to talk about a few of the posters before I come back. Just click the arrow next.
Click the arrow. Okay. He was back.
Yeah, they're a little bit.
Yeah. There we go. I'm going to talk about the 1848 campaign. Zachary Taylor running for the Whig Party. He was nominated as a war hero, just as the Whigs nominated William Henry Harrison in 1840 for their standard bearer. Taylor was born in 1784 in Orange County, Virginia, and grew up on the Kentucky frontier near Louisville. He never attended school and joined the Army in 1808, serving in the War of 1812 and several Indian wars in the East. Taylor earned his nickname Old Rough and Ready in the Mexican War, where he commanded U.S. forces at Buena Vista, the last battle in the war fought in northern Mexico, and Taylor's final battle as a commander. This was in 1847, February of 1847. At the battle, Old Rough and Ready clubs, after the battle, Old Rough and Ready clubs were formed, and stories circulated about his informal outfit, which included a straw hat on his head. The nickname inspired many slogans and at least one campaign song, such as you see on this poster. In the days before electronic media, music was distributed by printed sheets and word of mouth. Songs were sung at campaign rallies, and sheet music helped people remember the words for the next rally, or for just singing at the local pub with your fellow Taylor supporters. When the Whig Party nominated Taylor in June, he was not at the convention, but at his plantation in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. By the way, Taylor was the last slave-owning man to be president of the United States. The party sent Taylor a letter of notification collect. Because Taylor had been getting a lot of unpaid mail, he had instructed his postmaster to forward all of it to the dead letter office. Several weeks went by. The Whig Party was a little concerned they hadn't heard back from him, so they sent him another letter of notification, postage paid, and he accepted. When he was nominated, Zachary Taylor was 63 years old. He had never voted in his life and was a Southerner who owned 300 slaves. He became the last president to hold that distinction, as I mentioned. 2 years earlier, when the idea of running for president was floated to him, Taylor wrote, "The idea, quote, had never entered my head, nor is it likely to enter the head of any sane person." The 1848 election was held on November 7th, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, in accordance with legislation passed in 1845. It was the first time all the states voted on the same day. Tuesday had become a traditional voting day, allowing rural voters to get to polling places without having to travel on the Sabbath. The first Tuesday after the first Monday provision assured that an election would not fall on November 1st, All Saints' Day, a holy day of obligation for Roman Catholics. Now I'll talk a little bit about the 1880 election. James Garfield running as the Republican candidate. In 1880, the Republican Party was split between the stalwarts, loyal to the old-style patronage tactics of former President Ulysses S. Grant, and the half-breeds, moderates in favor of reform, who did not want Grant and his cronies back at the public trough. The Republican National Convention was deadlocked for several days between Grant and reformer James G. Blaine from Maine. On the 36th ballot, they chose a compromise candidate, James Abram Garfield of Ohio. Garfield was the last president born in a log cabin. His widowed mother raised him and his brothers on a farm. During the summer of his 17th year, young James drove mules on the towpath of the Ohio Canal, earning the nicknames Towpath Jim and Boatman Jim. He was elected to the U.S. House in 1862 and served 9 terms. In 1879, the Ohio legislature elected him to the U.S. Senate. During that campaign, a prominent Clevelander journeyed to Garfield's home in Mentor, Ohio, to warn him of a plot on his life. Garfield's reply, "Well, if assassination is to play its part in this campaign, and I must be the sacrifice, perhaps it is best I am ready." One historian called the 1880 contest thoroughly dull. The parties differed little on the major issues: civil service reform, denying federal aid to parochial schools, and cracking down on illegal immigrant labor. In 1880, that meant the Chinese. Republicans held up Garfield as a reformer in the mold of Hayes and called upon his working-class background to portray him as Farmer Garfield, as you see in this poster, complete with a physique that reflected long hours spent in the house gym. Here you see him rooting out corruption and evil in a location that appears to be the Rose Garden. Garfield did not travel during the campaign, but met delegations at his estate in Mentor, which I just happened to visit a couple of months ago, and it's a fantastic site run by the National Park Service. It was the first successful front porch campaign for the presidency. The election split the country geographically, the South going for the Democrats, the Democrat Winfield Hancock, and the North for the Republican. The phenomenon of the Solid South for the Democrats would last for over 80 years. And it was close. The margin of the popular vote was the smallest ever. Garfield won by fewer than 2,000 votes out of 9 million cast, though he did win easily in the electoral vote. In June 1881, Garfield was walking through the Baltimore and Potomac train station in Washington, which is where the National Gallery is now. And he was shot by a lawyer who believed he was entitled to a job with the new administration. Garfield lingered for several months, but as some of you who read about this know from a recent book, inexpert medical treatment caused his wounds to become more infected, and he died on September 19th, having been president for only 6 months. Back to you, Amy.
Sorry, we got a little mixed up here. Okay. These posters are from the 1900 election, which pitted William Jennings Bryan against current President William McKinley. Bryan is well known now as the prosecutor of the 1925 Scopes trial, but he can also be remembered as the man who ran unsuccessfully for president 3 times, first in 1896, again during this election in 1900, and then in 1908. Bryan was a tireless orator, and he basically invented the stumping campaign, where he traveled and spoke all throughout the country. During this particular campaign, he traveled about 1,800 miles over 3 months, and he gave countless speeches, at one point giving 12 speeches in 15 hours, which is pretty impressive. In the 1900 campaign, Bryan's main issues were anti-imperialism, antitrust, and free silver. Regarding imperialism, America had just won the Spanish-American War and had gained Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines as a result. And while there was definitely opposition to imperialism in the electorate, it was at that time overshadowed by the excitement of having just won the war. The free silver issue was a movement to tie the value of money more strongly to silver rather than gold, and it had been the major issue in the previous election in 1896. But by 1900, it had become outdated. In the last 4 years, the world gold supply had increased and the economy had strengthened. McKinley, meanwhile, just needed to ride the success of the Spanish-American War and the country's economic prosperity to another 4 years in office. And the Republican slogan urged 4 more years of the full dinner pail, because I guess people used to eat their dinners out of pails. As you can see, Bryan is really trying to cram a lot into his poster. There's a rooster. We've got this female independence figure taking an axe labeled democracy to a creature labeled truss, who to me looks a lot like the flying spaghetti monster. We have figures from both sides of the ongoing Philippine insurgency protesting in front of the Statue of Liberty. We've got the Declaration of Independence under a portrait of Bryan, and just a lot of other stuff. There's a silver coin towards the bottom, and up top it says, "No crown of thorns, no cross of gold," which refers to a 4-year-old speech that Bryan had made in support of free silver during his first presidential bid. All in all, it's a really convoluted and complicated message, which is in stark contrast to McKinley's poster, which is much simpler. His running mate, Theodore Roosevelt, had been a popular hero of the recent war, so he gets a place on the poster. And then he lists his main points simply and boldly. The campaign didn't need a lot of complicated messages or symbolic drawings. The message is clearly stated, the look is strong, and McKinley and Roosevelt won the election with 28 states, while Bryan took just 17. Tom?
There we go. Oops. Okay. I'm going to talk about the 1916 campaign and Charles Evans Hughes, who was running for the Republicans. In 1916, America was on edge. War had been raging in Europe for 2 years without hope of conclusion. Historian Paul Bowler noted that, quote, American people hoped for peace and prepared for war. President Woodrow Wilson took up the issue of, quote, preparedness, but when the Democratic National Convention convened in June in St. Louis, the slogan was, he kept us out of war. At the Republican convention, the fight came down to New York Senator Elihu Root and Supreme Court Justice Charles Evans Hughes. Hughes, who was not able to campaign during the primaries because of his position on the court, was picked on the third ballot. Hughes had graduated from Brown University at age 19 and Columbia Law School. He taught at New York Law School with Woodrow Wilson. He ran successfully for governor in 1906 against William Randolph Hearst. And in 1908, he ran again for governor rather than accept the vice presidential slot under President William Howard Taft. Taft wasn't upset by the rejection. He appointed Hughes to the Supreme Court in 1910. Charles Evans Hughes remains the only Supreme Court justice to be nominated by a political party. After Hughes was nominated, former President Theodore Roosevelt offered lukewarm support, referring in private to him as a bearded iceberg, saying the only difference between Hughes and Wilson was a shave. Teddy, so generous. This poster of Hughes, the last man with a beard to run for president as a major party candidate, no wonder I like the guy, reflects a man of integrity and honesty. No tricky slogans, no fancy graphics. During the campaign, however, Hughes was not consistent, especially in his take on America's involvement in the Great War. Sometimes he attacked Wilson for not being more forceful with Germany, but when Hughes himself spoke softly, especially in front of German and German-oriented audiences, people started referring to him as Charles Evasive Hughes. Hughes's fatal mistake in the campaign came in California, when Republican progressive Governor Hiram Johnson was running for the Senate. Hughes seemed to distance himself from Johnson. One day they were actually at the same hotel in Long Beach, but never got together. Though Hughes sent Johnson a note immediately thereafter, the damage was done. The press called it the forgotten handshake. Election night began promisingly for Hughes, with the Northeast almost solidly in the Republican camp. By midnight, some newspapers were putting out editions declaring Hughes the winner. Times Square flashed the news to a crowd of 100,000, and an American flag appeared over Hughes's hotel, the Astor. People were calling for Hughes to appear in public, but he held back, unsure of the outcome. Then the Western state returns began coming in, and they shifted the election toward Wilson. Because of the forgotten handshake, Hughes lost California by only 3,400 votes. Had he won California and its 13 electoral votes, he would have won the election. Next, we're going to talk about 1956, the re-election of Dwight Eisenhower. Leading up to the 56 election, the real suspense was whether Eisenhower was going to keep Richard Nixon on the ticket. Ike wanted Nixon to accept a cabinet post, and he sent Len Hall, head of the Republican Party, to break the news to Nixon. His reaction? He's never liked me. He's always been against me. Actually, Hall was concerned that dropping Nixon might split an already divided party, so he commissioned a series of polls that proved Nixon ran ahead of any other possible Republican candidate, so Eisenhower kept him on the ticket. Though the Republicans had lost Congress in the 1954 midterms, Ike's appeal had not diminished. With fighting in Korea concluded and the economy chugging along, Eisenhower was, as the old expression goes, in the catbird seat. This poster reflects the promise he offered America: more peace, more prosperity. In March of 1956, Eisenhower announced he would run again, and then in June he had intestinal surgery. Suddenly his health became an issue. In 1955, he had suffered a heart attack, and now this surgery less than a year later. The Democrats harped on Ike as a part-time president. Citing his age, he turned 66 in 1956, and his frequent vacations, very often involving golf. Their best slogan, defeat part-time Eisenhower and full-time Nixon. Playing on fears that Nixon would ascend to the presidency in place of an incapacitated Ike. The Democratic nominee, Adlai Stevenson, who had run against Ike in 1952, allowed the delegates of the Democratic Convention to pick his running mate, and Senator Estes Kefauver of Tennessee got the nod over a rising young star of the party, Senator John F. Kennedy of Massachusetts. Stevenson campaigned on a pledge for a new America, laying the groundwork, as one historian noted, for Kennedy's new frontier and Johnson's great society. He was an eloquent speaker who, in the words of David Halberstam, seemed incapable of uttering a sentence that did not sound polished. Ike did less campaigning, in part because of his health and also because he felt comfortable about his prospects. For the first time, TV ads dominated the campaign, and many appealed to women voters, but this was not exactly a thrilling campaign, with neither candidate staking out well-defined positions. Comedian Mort Saul made this observation: Eisenhower stands for gradualism, Stevenson stands for moderation. Between these two extremes, we the people must choose. They chose Ike. Back to you, Amy.
Okay, the last campaign we're going to talk about is the 1972 election. On the left here is an unofficial campaign poster made privately by 3 artists who supported McGovern, which is reflective of the grassroots nature of McGovern's campaign in general. The font evokes the Constitution, and the flag being put back together is meant to suggest McGovern's intention to end the Vietnam War and heal the country. But to me, the messy flag evokes the chaos of the Democratic Party leading up to and during the 1972 campaign. Edward Kennedy had been the shoo-in candidate, but he ended up not even running because of the Chappaquiddick scandal. 15 people did declare candidacy for the Democratic ticket, and the most popular ones fell hard and publicly. For those who did run, the primary season turned into a real circus, which you can read all about in Hunter S. Thompson's great book, Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail. Ed Muskie was a major front-runner, but his campaign was basically brought down by a series of dirty tricks orchestrated by the Nixon campaign. He didn't handle these dirty tricks well. At one point, he broke down during a press conference, although he later claimed that his tears were just melted snow. George Wallace was another major candidate, but he was gunned down and paralyzed at a speaking engagement during the primaries. So even when McGovern did finally ascend to the top of the list, things didn't go smoothly. At the Democratic National Convention, there had been changes to the voting and nominating processes that kept McGovern from accepting the nomination until 2 in the morning, which was well after most TV viewers had gone to bed, so it was pretty anticlimactic. Missouri Senator Thomas Eagleton was chosen as the vice presidential candidate, but within days it was leaked that he had undergone electroshock therapy for depression. At first, McGovern pledged his 1,000% support, only to reconsider and drop him from the ticket a few days later. McGovern was then publicly turned down by 5 people before Sergeant Shriver agreed to be his running mate. It was a complicated situation, and McGovern handled it as best he could, but let's just say it did not inspire confidence in his campaign. And in the end, his grassroots campaign was no match for Nixon's very well-funded and well-oiled campaign machine. Part of his campaign machine was Nixon's in-house advertising agency called the November Group. Their strategy was to depict him not as a candidate for president, but as the president. Rather than going for a conceptual message, like the one in McGovern's poster here, in this poster, the November Group highlighted the concrete successes Nixon had had over the past 4 years, which included his historic summit trips to China and Russia, his elimination of the draft, and advances in education and civil rights. And of course, since Vietnam was the major issue of this campaign, they tried to de-emphasize the war with the statistic at the top of the poster about spending more on human resources than on defense. Besides the unpopular war, unemployment and inflation were on the rise, and the slogan, "Now more than ever," implies that times are tough, but Nixon is doing a good job. Ultimately, the November group strategy worked, and Nixon won every state but Massachusetts, which the following year, when the Watergate scandal broke, inspired a popular bumper sticker that read, "Don't blame me, I'm from Massachusetts." Hand things over to Ralph again.
I want to thank Tom and Amy for all of their insights on the posters. We do have time for a few questions, but I did want to say before we take questions that a few of the posters will be outside of here after the program is over, so you can see some of them. There are some conservation concerns with the posters, so I would ask that you just stand back a little bit from the posters and let our poster curator, Jan Grenche, handle the posters. So please take a look at them, and I hope you'll enjoy seeing them. So now I'll open it up for questions. So questions?
Which of the Virgin Islands has your book facility?
The Center for the Book? I will have to ask Guy Molinaro.
St. Thomas,
Thank you.
Okay.
I believe. You have to go online.
Yes.
Do you have a credit section in the back that locates for each of the items?
Yes, we do have a credit section in the back, so all of the posters that are there have the Library of Congress IDs. If there is a digital ID for it, we have that as well, so you can go there and see the poster online. There are also some unprocessed posters that are there that I understand from our poster curator, Jan Grenche, have now been processed, so there are digital IDs now available for those.
Yep. The 68 poster you had, Nixon's the one.
Yes.
One of your colleagues mentioned Hunter Thompson's book about the 72 election. But I recall that was a Dick Tuck joke. He was this famous prankster that didn't like Nixon going back to his days in California. And at the Miami convention, which was in 72, not 68, he hired a bunch of welfare mothers to walk around carrying that placard outside the convention. And it made a lot of headlines, Nixon's the one. They were pulling their signs that Nixon's the one. But you say that's 68, so that's a very...
Yeah, that is
it
68.
actually predated that, so maybe Tuck got credit for something he didn't deserve.
Well, I think the 72 poster is the one, well, it's, the re-elect the president poster, the 72 one, that Amy had up earlier. That's the one that, I'll show you that one. Oops, that one right there. So Nixon now more than ever. That's the 72. The earlier one was the 68. Yes.
I'm interested in how you made your selections, given the volume of materials that you had. For example, did you consider the size of the runs on these posters or their distribution across the nation? Talk a little bit about how you decided.
We were really trying to look for visual appeal for the most part. This is we had several interns in the office that summer who were helping with this, and one of the questions we asked them is, which poster would you hang on a dormitory wall? And that's one of the things we really had to think about. What would someone want to have framed? We had more for some campaigns than other campaigns. Most of our posters come in through copyright deposits. And some of these were not deposited for copyright. And even in the later campaigns, we have fewer and fewer campaigns that actually give us their material. So that was also an issue that came up, was what was the best material that we had. The Nixon poster earlier, the Nixon's the One poster, is from the Yanker poster collection. And that's was from a collection of street art posters, which we did use quite a bit just to, as I said, have a little bit of visual tension in the book. Other questions? Yes.
I noticed you start with Andrew Jackson in the book. Is that because prior campaigns did not have campaign posters, or did we just not have them?
Well, 1828 is really the beginning of, I think, the modern presidential campaign, because 1828 is the first election where white men who did not own property could vote. So that was the first campaign where there was really a lot more actual campaigning going on. So that's why we started in 1828 rather than before that. I don't think there was very much in the way of campaign materials before that. There were posters. I mean, really, campaigning really started as soon as George Washington said that he wasn't going to run for re-election. But we had, I think, 1828 is the beginning of what we now think of as a modern presidential campaign. Other questions? Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming today. There are books available outside, and also, as I said, there are posters that you can actually take a look at if you will just be careful with our poster curator and listen to her instructions. You get to see some great posters. Thanks very much for coming.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.